Well, good morning, everybody. And once again, we're back with Switching It Up with Jimbo and Nick. And with me today, no surprises, I have Jimbo.
I'm here, as always,
and I have,
unsurprisingly.
And I have Nick. James, you've got some news to share, haven't you, with everybody? Because I think we need to share it with our audience, don't we?
It's not in line with the sustainability podcast, so let's leave that there.
You can mention it, mate. It's okay.
I think your contribution to society in procreating and
Yeah.
extending the Jimbo
The greenhouse gases
lineage of your family.
Yes, I have. Yes.
So
yes.
Congratulations.
Thank you very much.
The baby boy, yeah?
Yes.
Fantastic. And the name?
Louis.
Very regal.
So very regal. Yes.
You wouldn't associate regal with Jimbo, would you? But it's
Well, it's yeah. Technically, it's not regal because it wasn't very king-like, was it? He was potentially king, wasn't officially king. So yeah, but his middle name's Henry, who was a king. So no, I have a good naming convention for my kids. So naming conventions, as we've discussed before in networks, are important. So it's only important that I live by my standards and apply that to my kids as well.
But you didn't put .com on the registration at the registration.
No. But no. So my naming convention is a first name ending in an IE or an RY, like the rename, and then a royal, like a king or a queen in the middle.
I like it. So this is all part of your succession planning.
It's all part of my succession planning. Yeah,
okay. Which is any of this has nothing to do with what we're talking about today, but I just think it's really nice to
I've got to plant more trees. Nick Gorse is going to kill me for saying that, but I've got to plant more trees to offset carbon.
He did say that you can't say that on the podcast today. So. Yeah, as we've alluded to, today we're going to be talking about sustainability. Yes. And we're going to be talking about sustainability in relation to your industry.
Yep.
Mm-hmm. So from your perspective, I mean, what is happening, what is being discussed around sustainability in relation to network computing and the solutions and the types of conversations you're having around that?
I think we see mixed involvement and kind of awareness of it. I think at a high level, from a kind of company kind of ESG model and principles, it's on everyone's radar, right? You know, you go and look at tenders and whatever it is, and sustainability is not like one of the top handful on there. I think when you translate that further down the food chain into what's actually being day-to-day, boots on the ground, what's tangible within the infrastructure. I don't want to kind of ruffle a few feathers, but I'd say probably not a lot's happening. I think if you went and asked 10, 20, 100 network managers, what's your power consumption, how efficient is your data center, I think you'd struggle to get reasonable answer out of many of them.
Yeah, I think. Well, if we look at the industry today, I think the numbers that came out of lots of recent studies was that the DC business contributes to sort of 1 to 2% of the global sort of power consumption, right? Yeah, so from that perspective, I think networks of that basis only made up something like 3%. So I think.
What was that, 3% of
that 1 to
2%?
Yeah, so if you think about that, that's probably why, going back to what you say, you don't see much movement, because I think if we just look at it from a network point of view, it's quite a small percentage of a larger piece of the pie, right?
Doesn't mean you shouldn't fix it, right? You should do what you can. There's definitely a lot of noise from vendors, right? Yeah. Looking at efficiencies of chip design and that kind of stuff. You go and buy any, or look at any data sheet now or new product release, all the power efficiencies is always highly publicised.
Yeah, and maybe the government need to introduce like a ULEZ on computing infrastructure, right? So that the older stuff gets replaced. Maybe I don't know.
Well, I think what's interesting is it's not only what's happening within the industry, but it's sort of public perception and opinion. Because one could say now that the IT sort of computing industry is moving towards to have more contribution to that sort of carbon output than, say, the airline industry. Now, the airline industry has had a massive kick, and everybody's saying, oh, it's terrible and people shouldn't fly. All of a sudden now, you've got the computer IT sort of industry coming through, and it's actually contributing more O2 emissions.
Yeah, but it's a catch-22, isn't it? The less flying you do, the more computing you need to do your business, right?
So I get it.
So I think there's a trade-off somewhere in there, but I don't know what it is personally. I think it's a bit of a mixture.
I think you can only do what you can do, right?
Yeah.
It's the same as recycling your stuff at home. I know that you personally, washing out your Marmite pots at home on a Sunday evening, ready to put in your recycling, you probably think that I'm completely pissing in the wind with it. But you can only do what you can control, right? And I think as long as your own environment's, you contribute your bit, you just hope that everyone can do the same for their bit.
Yeah.
And the sum of that is significant.
I have this real issue that you see me on a Sunday evening washing out my Marmite. Do I look like that guy? am I doing a jar of Marmite a week?
my concern is what was the Marmite used for, whether it was toast or something else, but that's a different conversation.
So let's talk about Cisco. I mean, obviously, Jimbo, you went out to Cisco Live.
Yep.
And we spoke about that on the last podcast. In relation to sustainability, was that a big thing that they were talking about?
Yeah, massively. Yeah, they had a whole zone for it.
Okay.
And there was lots of different approaches to it. And I think some of it is hardware, and it goes back to what I said about the ULEZ charges and stuff, right? Is that there's still a lot of people in the industry running 7Ks, 5Ks and stuff like that.
Yep.
Which are quite power hungry in comparison to some of the newer platforms, right? So I think that's an important takeaway. But I also don't think that's necessarily just a Cisco thing. I think that's across the board for lots of vendors. But I guess what I saw from Cisco Live was a lot of initiatives to start to drive that sustainability story, like where they were talking about recycling plastics, so taking back RMA devices that were dead, killing them off, recycling the plastics from old switches into new components, fan modules, that kind of stuff. Which was a boring session, but it was actually quite an insightful session in terms of their life cycle, in terms of their packaging and all that kind of stuff. So they've been doing a lot of work to reduce their packaging, to reduce their carbon footprint, their travel and stuff like that. So rather than doing air freight, they were looking at different methods of getting it here, electric vehicles and things like that, which was actually quite interesting to see how they're driving their carbon efficiencies for this stuff.
The packaging's not a trivial one, but it's significant, right? This is not vendor specific, but you go and order a bit of kit. The first thing that people take out, they go, power cable, don't need that, don't need that polystyrene, and it all goes in the bin. Yeah.
Well, this is what they're saying, is that they're trying to take a bit of an Amazon-esque approach to it in terms of like package reduction to what's needed, and that's it. And in some respects, even return some of that packaging for reuse.
Well, said that. Why don't Amazon come around your house once a week, or if they send a load of stuff, why don't they take the packaging back? Why do you make it Amazon's problem? Right? They deliver a whole load of cardboard. I don't want to be going to the tip on a Sunday evening after you washed out your Marmite pots. I want to unpackage that thing from Amazon.
I'll tell you why.
Here's your stuff. You take it and you recycle it, Amazon.
I'll tell you why. Because the box they left outside your house is piss wet through.
Because they just threw it over the fence.
They chucked it over the fence, and it's got piss wet through. Yeah.
But all the things you speak about there, guys, is very much in the vein of what you would expect.
Yes.
A company of Cisco. You expect, although the session was boring and probably predictable, but there was probably nothing on that session where you thought, oh, that's new and different. It's probably what you expected to hear, yeah?
Well, yes and no. I think for me it was interesting to see how far they're going.
Yeah.
Because I think in today's world you can be probably quite selfish because everything is commodity driven. I think there's a lot of selfishness, and I think we were talking before this in the preamble. Printers, for example, like sometimes it's cheaper to go and buy a new printer with a small amount of ink than it is to buy a set of cartridges to replace the ink in your current printer. So I think from that perspective, we're in a very commoditized lifestyle, which I think has got to change, and I think that mindset, that on-demand mindset for this stuff plays a big difference. So for me, it was quite enlightening to see, because it took me out of that commoditized mindset for a moment, going, I need a new phone every year or whatever it might be, to, well, actually there's some thought process around it, I suppose.
Who prints things out?
You're smiling, Nick.
I've got a story I wanted to reference, but I'm not going to talk about it.
You can tune in on the X-Rated podcast, or switching it up with Jimbo and Nick. But, so we also as well, obviously, in the last session we spoke about or in one of our sessions, we spoke about AI
Yep.
and the surge, the massive surge and increase in power consumption that AI is bringing. Again, is that something that's hot on people's? Are people really recognising that? I mean, everybody's striving. We want AI. We want AI. It's right for our business, etc., etc. But actually, if you think about it from a sustainability perspective, it's actually driving up consumption of power. Yeah,
massively. Like people go and roll out AI based or networks that can support AI infrastructure. People generally going to go and buy more kit. They're not going to use their existing kit. Generally, they're going to go and buy a specialised solution, so expanding the current DC. But not only that, you've got more devices that are more power hungry, generating more heat. We were at that session a while back, do you remember? And then people were talking about the heat of transceivers.
Yeah.
They were saying that the heat of like a 400 gig transceiver or something, it gets to about 80 or 90 degrees Celsius. So straight away, you've not just got the power, the device is churning. You've then got all the AC that's having to cool that temperature down, and then suck all of that heat out of the DC.
But this comes back to like water cooling or liquid cooling, right? I think we're going to see an uptake in that because it gets rid of air conditioning, it gets rid of it's more circular economy in terms of that cooling efficiencies, right? So from that perspective, I see there's going to be a bit of an uptake in that kind of stuff for AI because, as you say, it's going to run hot, it's going to do what it needs to do, and so you're going to have the power, the cooling, the sort of the rack elevation sort of considerations, more footprint and stuff. So I think it's all going to play a part.
It's definitely conflicting,
and it is.
Of course, it is
definitely.
Yeah, I get it.
Yeah.
So we have this demand, this want to work more efficiently, more purposely in what we're doing. But on the flip side, it's just going to be.
But I think it also comes down to a bit to the supply chain, right? Because from that point of view, it drives an emphasis on the power providers to be more green in how they're delivering the energy, right? Whether that's wind, whether that's solar, whether that's nuclear or whatever. They've got to find greener ways to deliver this power to enable people to be more green in what it is they're doing, right? So I think the supply chain in that ecosystem of sustainability plays a massive part, right?
Yeah, interesting. So Nick, you and I were having a conversation the other day, weren't we, about reporting? Because obviously a lot of these corporate organisations had to be reporting on this sustainability. And I know you shared with me a story where you were actually asked to take a chunk of business, host a chunk of business elsewhere.
Yeah,
so
shady,
do
isn't
it,
it?
do it yourself.
Yeah.
As opposed to the corporate take the responsibility of it.
Yeah. So
we came up with a new term, didn't we? We called it green laundering.
Green laundering. Yeah. What that is, the context of that. I don't know how much you should probably say, but it doesn't matter.
NDA.
It was. We were asked to propose hosting a managed service for a client.
Yeah.
So that they didn't have to deploy their own infrastructure, their own DC, and therefore report on extra carbon emissions. They wanted to make it someone else's problem to say you host it, and then it's our problem, right? We're the bad guys. But the kind of what a lot of people are doing is we could even then go and take that same concept and run it in the cloud, and then go make it the cloud provider's problem.
Yeah.
So this concept of
but where is that report? I think the
where's it reported?
Where's it reported?
It's
and
like
so
said,
you report it as a vendor or a supplier into them. But they're mitigating that off.
Well, they would just wash their hands with it. The end person that needs the stuff, wash their hands with it and go, oh, it's Best Buy's problem.
Yeah.
And we would go, oh, it's Amazon's problem. So this green laundering term that I think we're going to coin, it's just no one knows where this stuff came from, right? The money laundering is you lose the sight of the origin because it's changed hands and formed so many different times. It's no different with power consumption, right? And who's delivering the service and who's taking the hit on the numbers.
So one would say that over time, because that can't carry on, over time there's going to be there's got to be more transparency, I guess.
I think it's always going to be a difficult conversation, irrespective of how you put it, because somewhere down the line, someone's got to take it on the chin and take ownership of it, right? And I don't know what that looks like, or it might effectively come back to the power providers, right? Is that if you can cut out the carbon from the outset, just through the components that you're using to deploy your service, then maybe that's the way, right? But I think the economy is changing. The drive for electric vehicles or hydrogen, that kind of stuff, is all driving the transport side of things to be more sustainable. So I think once we start to see that and we start to see our energy consumption being more sustainable, then I think those numbers will dramatically come down, because yes, you've got this number here, but if you can confidently say, well, I've got a power consumption here, but that's all coming from green energy, then you know what, there's a that you can they cancel each other out almost, I suppose, right? So
the other thing that I think where a lot of people fall down on is a lot of companies will say, I've got an existing network or some infrastructure, whatever, I'm going to go and buy some new stuff that's more power efficient, right? So yeah, brilliant, numbers are great, I'm really green. But what they don't do is they never turn the old stuff off. So rather than having one replace the other, the new one's on that's more efficient, the old one that's inefficient is still on because for whatever reason they've got some critical services on it that they can't migrate, and all of a sudden they've got a dependency on both. They've got active services on the old inefficient stuff and the new efficient stuff.
Yeah.
The sum of that is even worse than if they just stayed on the old stuff. So I think it just puts an emphasis on projects and companies to wrap up and follow through on their goal. You've got to get aggressive and turn old stuff off.
It is, but it comes down to the reporting, right? Is that generally people are only reporting on the new stuff, not on the old stuff, because it's too hard to report on the old stuff. And that's the reality, right? Is that if we look at a lot of vendors out there, they're doing their bit to produce the carbon emission savings and this and that for new platforms, but they can't retrospectively go back and do this for the old stuff. So I think it's I understand where you're coming from, but at some point there's going to be a trade off, right? There's going to be a trade off saying, well, if it's here, it's here, and if it's there, it's not. And maybe that is like a taxation on organisations that goes back into something as I discussed earlier on, right? I don't know how you measure that and how you control it. To be brutally honest, I guess that's.
I'm sure if a taxation can be applied,
they would do. Exactly.
Yeah. So what are the tools out there? You know, from a corporate perspective, what tools are people using to actually monitor that?
I think tooling is available. I think the issue is you've got a lot of different teams that within a kind of infrastructure group that each have their own tool, and no one has the overall picture.
Right.
Like you might have people like DC specific people, knowing how much power is going to a certain rack. You might have a network guy that's pulling out the power stats from a switch.
Yeah.
But and you might have the compute guys that are understanding how much power the compute is drawing. No one's seeing the overall picture.
Yeah.
And everyone is specific to their own little bubble. Everyone is still siloed. That's how we see it currently.
It comes down to travel as well, right? You think about travel, right? If you've got to go to site to reboot a switch, like at the end of the day, there's some component of carbon emissions involved in that process.
I'll be on my Boris bike. Are they still Boris bikes?
I don't. I think generically they are. They were Barclays, weren't they? And now they're Santander.
Santander, aren't they?
They were Barclays.
Oh, were they Barclays?
Yeah, absolutely.
But I guess it's one of those things, and I think we had a bit of a chuckle when we were at Cisco Live, Nick Gorse and myself, because there was a slide up that said about the Catalyst low carbon mode, and we joked that basically the difference between the low carbon mode and the full fledged mode was they'd turned AI off, right? So it's just to reduce the power consumption. So I think maybe it's something like that, right? Is that it's a case of different platforms for different use cases where you're not buying, and this might come back down to vendors to drive.
It's just like turning off the lights in the rooms you're not in, right?
Exactly, that.
But, we were talking, weren't we, about some of the hypocrisy sometimes with tenders, and it's box ticking.
Yeah.
And putting additional processes and procedures in that you may or may not sort of implement.
Yeah, but it's also at some point products are gonna start to. Comes back down to sweating the assets, right? Because the assets have a shelf life, and if you can sweat them past their shelf life, then effectively they should become carbon neutral at a certain point in time, right? So again, there's
other things to consider, right? It's not just purely power. It's the sustainability element comes in many different forms as well, right? If you're going to go and buy a new kit, it might be more power efficient, but you still got to go and dig minerals out of the earth to go and make that stuff. You've got to go and get all the cobalt and the copper and whatever to make a device. So it's
but this is where I was saying I think there's more emphasis on the vendors and the suppliers to actually pinpoint that point in time when that product becomes carbon efficient or carbon neutral, right? Where you sweat the asset for so long and you've it becomes carbon neutral in itself, because over 3 years, if you've not had to remanufacture a switch for 3 years, you've effectively broke even, right? So I think there'll be lots of ways of manipulating that calculation to make it work.
There's a lot of buyback schemes now for vendors as well, right?
Is,
so it's not just a case of what do you do with the old kit? I'm going to go and chuck it in the Thames of the shopping trolleys. You can give it back to vendors who will maybe potentially give you a discount on something.
Yeah, well, Cisco Live in their sustainability zone, they were talking exactly about that. They were talking about the Cisco refresh or buyback, basically. But effectively, you buy it and lease it over 3 years, and if you give it back, you get a percentage back towards your new solution, right? So again, there's I think a lot of vendors are looking at ways to recoup their old equipment, and and it comes back to that sort of sustainability life cycle, right? It's that what you put in, take back out and reuse it, right? Because that's how you reduce those numbers massively.
That's what Apple did, didn't they? They made a whole robot that was going off topic a little bit, but they made a whole robot that could disassemble an iPhone so they could reuse some of the core components from it. So rather than you just leave it in your sock drawer, like probably most people do, you take your old phone back to the store and they would plug it into a robot and take all the different parts and break it down so that it could be recycled.
We're in that. I mean, every time we talk about some of these things, new developments, and obviously AI is up there as well, but we talk about this, we're very much in that transition, aren't we? Right now, we're in a transition world. In relation to some of those most energy efficient pieces of kit, Jimbo, what did you see out at Cisco? I mean, are you looking at different switches? Are you looking at software that's driving those? Is it?
Well, the answer is it's just not the network. Right?
No,
it's not the network,
it's
it's everything, right? It's all the components, it's all of the business processes, it's all of the business efficiencies that go into it, right? It's not. There's no one thing that solves the problem. I think
it's a sum of the whole, isn't it?
It's a sum of the whole. Yeah, exactly that. And servers maybe. If we look at networks, we're already rationalised quite dramatically in the network space. So being able to rationalise even further is probably a tall order for some organisations, right? If we look at virtualisation on the server front, again, a lot of businesses are running VMware or whatever, or Nutanix, whatever it might be, and they've rationalised to a point that they have no sort of dedicated compute infrastructure in their business. So, or as Nick said, they've gone to the cloud. So rationalisation in the DC space might be quite tricky, might be quite hard to achieve. I think, as you say, it's the sum of the whole that brings it all back together, I think.
Yeah, and I guess I read something the other day, and I've got it in my notes here. It says the transition to sustainability needs to be done on behalf of the individual by the systems at large scale. So I guess what that is saying is, because there is so much movement of people now in positions and jobs, you might have someone who's a real sustainability captain working within a business, and then that individual will move on or go to another department or get redeployed or whatever. So that whole procedure and whole process must be owned by the company, must be owned by the business. It must be. It's almost like,
well, it's strategic.
Yeah, of course it is.
It's everyone's responsibility.
Of course it is.
As you said, washing your pots up and putting them in the bin. Everyone's got a responsibility at some point in that process, and so I think it's a strategic thing, and it's got to be driven from the top down. I don't think it's a bottom up sort of driver.
No, then you see those washed out Marmite pots, and then you see the bin man just dump them all like every different thing into the same
into the same bin.
The same bin. Yeah. We've seen it in a few places. Yeah. Bins are broken out, paper, glass, metal, and then the cleaner just goes around and chucks them all into one bin bag and.
Yeah, downstairs. Yeah,
well, Bob doesn't sort them out.
You feel better though, don't you? When you put it in the right container, you feel good about yourself.
You've done something.
What happens after? You've got no control over it. I guess.
Yeah.
So the conversation of sustainability. So when people are first talking to you about deployment of solutions, architecture, understanding what they should be doing, how far into the conversation does sustainability come? Is it sort of at the end? Or is it brought in as part of the whole conversation right from the beginning? Where are you seeing that when you talk to people? Is the requirement the leading?
Oh, it's always a requirement for sustainability on an RFP.
But is the requirement the leading factor? And then later on, it's about, we've got to give a nod to we've got to understand now about sustainability, but actually it must do this.
I don't think anyone says it must do this, because I think it's a hard. It's generally on the supplier to outline where those savings are to help that business help. I suppose help towards that decision process, right? I think it's I don't think there's a particular answer to it, but I think it's more.
Yeah, I was just interested to see how much is the need driving the outcome as opposed to a combination of assessing everything. I don't know. It could be something that just molds into the one conversation.
Bit of both, bit of top down, or bit of bottom up.
Maybe.
I
think responsibility sits with everyone, but I think I think corporate responsibility plays and strategy plays a big part, right?
Yeah. So, we've spoken again on previous podcasts about multi-cloud, and we're talking about different vendors across that, and how, you've got hybrid working as well. Is everybody how is that alignment across cloud providers, on-prem? How is that effectively being able to be reported on effectively when you've got so many moving parts?
So what we're saying, it's no different when you're talking about multi-cloud, or you're talking about different business units or different teams, different infrastructure teams within the same company. The compute, the network, the storage, that's no different to you're talking about multi-cloud environments or whatever. Yeah. It's difficult. It's very, very difficult to do. Because if anyone comes up with something, single platform, they can do all of this stuff, then
they're quids in.
As long
as it's sustainable.
As long as it's sustainable.
So you're an IT manager, okay, and you've got a network that you're managing. How do you start the process looking at sustainability? What are some of the things, the key elements you need to be looking at within your infrastructure to say, right, I'm going to go on this road. I've been asked by the business to improve the sustainability of my network. What are the first things? What are the priorities? What are the first things that they would start to look at and progressively sort of move through?
I think it's a case of they ask the question rather than have any particular sort of deliverables on that. As we said before, I don't think there's any one particular thing they look for. I think it's generally on the vendor to outline where those savings are and where those efficiencies come from on the sustainability front, be that power consumption. And it comes back down to what you said, the lack of reporting. If people generally aren't reporting on this stuff on the legacy infrastructures, because they don't have that capability, or they don't have that knowledge of what's there today. So again, it's very hard to retrofit what you've got today and understand where your savings. But if you're going in replacing a 7K with a 9K, you can generally say, well, you're going to save this and compared to this, right? So you can see the instant savings. It gets a bit more tricky with newer stuff, but it's
not always just the infrastructure that they look at as well, right? So if you look at tender process, it's not just how much power is that device drawing? No. It's not just that. Company to company, they're looking at each other's ESG policies. They're saying, right, well, what are your sustainability policies? What are you doing? And if you're not doing, this is nothing to do with the infrastructure. If you as a business are not taking accountability and not doing X, Y, Z, we're going to rule you out of the tender process. Yeah. Do you see what I mean? So there's two different elements to it, and it's complicated one.
Well, it's a subject that's not going away.
It's not going away. No.
And I would imagine we're going to have more chats about it progressively throughout the year, or as long as we're doing these podcasts for. But what are your takeaways around it? Nick and
I think it's awareness. I think it's purely awareness from engineers. A lot of network engineers don't even consider this stuff. Many people kind of historically...
It's education.
It's education and awareness of it.
So things are like what we're doing today, I guess. It's just putting it out there.
Yeah, consider it. Consider it. If you go move from A to B, what are the power savings? How much heat are you saving? How much power are you saving? Where does that energy come from? I think just consider it, right? That's not it's got to come from senior management. That's everyone's responsibility. Down from a guy that's cabling stuff in the DC to a guy that's designing the infrastructure or racking the kit, whatever it is. Everyone's got to consider it.
Yeah, that's corporate strategy down, isn't it? And that's the corporate responsibility strategy downwards, giving a good mandate for everyone to follow in some way, shape, or form, right? Because unfortunately, today's age, some people need to be told what to do, right?
And I like polar bears. I want to see them. I want to see them for a long time.
They just put a polar near where I live out in Suffolk. I think at Jimmy's farm, there's a polar bear there. If you like polar bears,
I reckon that's just a bear that someone's painted white. That's not a polar bear.
There is a polar bear in Suffolk. I can inform you. Well, guys, I think we've ticked a big box today on this podcast. So we've now done our sustainability podcast,
and we made it sustainable.
We all
travelled here by private private transport.
Private jet.
No, yeah, private jet.
Private jet flying 12 miles.
Yeah, I've used recyclable paper for my notes. That's been pretty good. But it's been fascinating to talk about it. As I said, I'm sure we'll talk about it again. Yep. But until next time, thanks guys.
Thanks a lot.
And we'll see you all next time for Switching It Up with Jimbo and Nick.
Thanks, Graham. Bye.
Cheers. Thanks. Bye.
Thanks.